Who knew that the fate of the fortunes of the Western world would come down to a single push of a button by a 76-year-old woman with a very long bowl cut? Maybe that's an oversimplification, but there is a question here. How many more big money printing events can the central banks of the world get away with? Monitoring this is the biggest spectator sport in all of crypto. Is this the last big print, or do they have enough life in them for another round or two? Regardless, it seems that fiat is on a collision course with the crypto Grim Reaper. Ready? Let's go. Today, we are going to discuss the similar but slightly different perspectives of Caitlin Long and Balaji on this question of whether or not this is the last print and some other issues, where the truth might actually lie between the two. Kwon Captured, the US and Hong Kong going in opposite directions on crypto, and Emurgo with a new MOU in Africa. If you were as amazed as I was that the AI didn't add a single finger here, it only subtracted about half of the pinky, or if you're finding value in these videos each weekday, please consider delegating to the Army of Spies stake pool, ticker AOS. Also, on Saturday, which should be tomorrow, if you're watching this on Friday, the day this video comes out, it'll be tomorrow, Saturday at 4 p.m. Eastern. I'll be on with Cardano Ecosystem News. That'll be on my channel and it'll be live. This should be a fun conversation, so tune in if you're not busy and ask us some questions. If you've been watching this channel over the last few days, you've probably picked up that I think this banking crisis we're in is pretty significant. In fact, I think it might be one of the most significant events for both the crypto world and the fiat world in a long time. Here's why I say that. The banking crisis represents the thing that the fiat world has known is inevitable, but has been trying to postpone, delay, avoid all this time. I think deep down somewhere, even the most ardent Keynesian central bankers knew that you could only kick the can down the road so long. And eventually the music stops and the whole party ends. Everything's over. The house of cards comes crashing down. On the crypto side, it's sort of what the whole crypto world's been looking forward to. It's what crypto was built for. The manipulation of the money supply by central banks around the world. And I don't even think this is like a US thing or a Western thing, a European thing. It's kind of the whole world. Every central bank in the world basically does this. Maybe somebody has some exception, some very small country where the central bank refuses to do this somehow. But as near as I can tell, it's every central bank in the world, or practically every central bank in the world, that does this thing where they want to escape from some kind of downturn, or they want to devalue their debt because they're always running a deficit. So they debase the monetary supply. And that can also, affect things like, the strength of imports and exports, how much they devalue their own currency versus the currency of their trading partners, all those kinds of things. And so, it's kind of like this relationship between the central banks. Each central bank can only debase their currency so much because then other nation states will not want to trade with them on those terms. It's a very complex system. But the one thing that everybody seems to agree on, at least everybody who doesn't have a vested interest in the current TradFi system, everybody who doesn't have a vested interest in this current traditional system that's existed for the last, 100 some odd years, everybody kind of agrees this is a system that at some point will no longer work. At some point, you build up so much debt in this system that you've had to debase your currency so much. And when I say your currency, I pretty much mean all of the currencies. You've had to debase all of the currencies to manage the debt for so long and to deal with little downturns and, various economic events that the whole system just breaks. Everybody seems to agree that that's the course the current fiat system is on. And this is pretty much just since the advent of the Federal Reserve System. Prior to that, we sort of had this wildcat banking era. If you've never heard of wildcat banks, prior to the Federal Reserve and the FDIC and this national banking system we have, wildcat banking was the issuance of paper currency in the United States by poorly capitalized state chartered banks. These wildcat banks existed alongside more stable state banks when the country had no national banking system. States granted banking charters readily and applied regulations ineffectively, if at all. Bank closures and outright scams regularly occurred, leaving people with worthless money. And this is the kind of thing you'll hear central bankers refer to when they talk about the need for the central banks to retain control. The central banks need to retain control of the financial system to avoid this kind of thing. They'll always talk about the wildcat banks and how there were scams and there was no backstop. There was no FDIC. So if there was a bank run, the bank might just go broke and all the depositors lose all their money. But there was something good about wildcat banks. Wildcat banks just gave you a bearer note that was redeemable for gold or silver. And they pretty much just, if they were doing things the right way, they were just warehousing your money. If they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, they would just warehouse gold and silver coins and issue this paper currency. But it wasn't this weird fractional banking thing we're doing today, where the bank takes your deposit and then maybe they make a bunch of long-term investments, like the kinds of purchases of long-term U.S. Treasury securities that got all of the banks in trouble that we've been talking about for the last couple of weeks. That wasn't going on. They were kind of just warehousing gold and silver coins and giving you a bearer note so that you could go around, engaging in commerce with those notes instead of having to lug around your gold and silver coins. Obviously, that's not what we're doing anymore. We're definitely doing the fractional reserve banking thing, and it doesn't seem to be working very well. And there's sort of a debate. There's sort of a debate going on how long it can continue to sustain itself. So just within crypto, we've sort of got two individuals who sort of represent different parts of the spectrum of thinking on this. So we've got Balaji here on the right. So Balaji has been very vocally espousing this view that this is the last big print. This crisis we're in right now, which we won't get into the details too much today, but we've talked about it many times on the channel. This crisis has entailed the near death of Credit Suisse, one of the big global systemically important banks, saved only by sort of a shotgun wedding with UBS and the Swiss National Bank sort of guaranteeing that to the tune of over $100 billion. Then you've got the bank term funding program, which potentially might inject $4.4 trillion in loans that Balaji and others like Arthur Hayes think will basically never be paid back to take care of those long-term U.S. treasuries that all of the regional banks bought, which people have also equated to basically infinite money printing. So we've got some problems with our fractional reserve banking system today. And the question is this the last big print? Balaji thinks maybe this is the last big one. Caitlin Long on the left, she doesn't think this is the last big one. But interestingly, Balaji says he could be wrong. And Caitlin Long says, I don't think this is the last one, but maybe Balaji's right. So they both sort of embrace that the other position could be correct. Maybe this is the last big money printing. Maybe it's not. Maybe the traditional system has a few more prints in it. And they've both recently gone on Anthony Pompliano's podcast. I strongly suggest you listen to both of those podcasts. If you want to hear both sort of the case that this is the death, it's time for the crypto Grim Reaper to come in and take the soul of the fiat system, then you should listen to the Balaji Anthony Pompliano podcast for that case. if you want the case of an insider, someone who spent a long time on Wall Street, who graduated from Harvard Law, then went on to, I think, 22 years on Wall Street. She worked in Zurich uh, for Credit Suisse, reporting to the co-CEOs of Credit Suisse back in the day. Somebody who truly is an insider in this world of banking. Then you've got Caitlin Long. She might also be maybe the smartest person in all of crypto. Honestly, I think if we gave everybody in crypto an IQ test, I wouldn't be at all shocked if she won the IQ test. She might be the smartest person in all of crypto, but she has this charismatic, folksy Wyoming manner of speaking where she doesn't flaunt her intelligence. So nobody quite picks up on it, but she might actually be the smartest person in all of crypto. That wouldn't shock me at all. Balaji, also extremely smart, but not really a banking insider. He's a tech guy. Between the two of them, I think we have a very good balance of perspectives on what's happening, at least from the crypto perspective. People who are not a part of crypto, who are still a part of the traditional finance world, they're reliant on this traditional banking world. Those people are probably going to have a wildly different perspective that doesn't involve the death of the traditional system because they live and die by that traditional system. But I think the common thread in crypto is that system is going to die. It's just a question of when. So besides disagreeing about whether or not this is the last dance for the US dollar system, Caitlin Long had some other really interesting observations. She mentioned that everybody who hasn't read The Creature from Jekyll Island should do so. I think a lot of people in crypto have read it. If you haven't, you should definitely read it. But she describes it as telling the true history of the Federal Reserve. The reason why the Federal Reserve actually exists, she says, is that it was a corrupt bargain between 6 bankers, a U.S. senator, and an assistant U.S. Treasury secretary who, under cover of saying they were going on a hunting trip, actually met after the Panic of 1907 or because of the Panic of 1907 and figured out a way to accomplish socialization of the losses of banks while retaining privatization of the profits of banks. So what she means by that is that when banks fell, because the Federal Reserve and the FDIC create this backstop, when banks fell, the federal government rushes in to save the situation. And that, of course, comes at the cost of the taxpayers. So the losses are socialized across US taxpayers. But when a bank does great, the profits of the bank are not shared with US taxpayers. I mean, they might pay their own taxes, the banks, but they really get to keep those profits. It's a privatization of profits and a socialization of losses. She, of course, is a fan of von Mises and Hayek of the Austrian School of Economics. So she sees this for what it is. She says we haven't had free market capitalism in banking for over a century. Since the foundation of the Federal Reserve, we basically haven't had free market capitalism in banking. And I think she's right. You can't really make socialization of losses compatible with capitalism in any significant way, in my opinion. She also says she differs with Balaji in that she doesn't think FedNow is the introduction of a CBDC. She, I think, is well-versed in all the central banks' CBDC plans. I think she sees what's going on as well as any of us, but she doesn't think that's what FedNow is. She also is kind of shocked that the anti-technology faction in the Biden administration was able to win out over the more technologically progressive faction, especially given that we have a presidential election coming next year in 2024. She's shocked that they would dare alienate the highly coveted young voters. She also points out the real reason why the regional banks are suffering in this banking crisis and the big banks, the global systemically important banks, are not suffering in the US is only because the big banks are subject to Basel III requirements, which include a liquidity coverage ratio, and the regional and community banks are not subject to that Basel III requirement. So the regional and community banks are finding themselves in trouble, while the big banks are okay because they already had to comply with that liquidity coverage ratio. She also pointed out something really interesting about the Credit Suisse UBS deal and the opening of the swap lines between the Fed and all of the other central banks, or the biggest ones that are sort of our friends. So she pointed out that the Swiss National Bank was guaranteeing the UBS acquisition of Credit Suisse to the tune of something just over $100 billion. But it doesn't make sense that the Swiss National Bank would actually be printing that amount of money, because the Swiss GDP is only like 800 billion. So this would be 1/8 of their total GDP. There's no way they're actually printing that amount of money. It's too big compared to the Swiss GDP. So she said what's actually happening in her estimation, her guess is that the European Central Bank and the Federal Reserve are actually footing a significant portion of that $100 billion bill, which of course would be, in Arthur Hayes's nomenclature, politically toxic. So the US Federal Reserve is not going to be talking about that, even though that might actually be the case. But she said she's going to keep an eye on the totals from the swap lines. That's published. I think she said that's published on a weekly basis. So we'll actually be able to see at some point in the near future how much money actually went out across those swap lines. And we've talked about how that operates recently on this channel. But she suspects that a tremendous amount of dollars will have gone out across the swap lines. She also cited, I believe she cited actual figures as to the amount of money that is moving out of these regional and community banks and into the large banks. And it's a very large amount. It turns out that that wasn't just idle speculation about this phenomenon happening. It's actually happening. A lot of money is moving out of the small banks and into the larger banks, which is kind of the opposite of what you want to see. You don't want to see further centralization in just a handful of gigantic banks. So there you go. A former Wall Street insider, a famous tech guy, both crypto people, slightly different perspectives on when we would actually see the last gasp of the dollar system, the final collapse of the dollar system, when the house of cards comes tumbling down. Different perspectives on that. But they both seem to feel very strongly that everybody knows this is going to happen. It's not like they're both, coincidentally holding this thesis. They both seem to believe that everybody knows this is going to happen. This dollar system we have in place currently, since the advent of the Federal Reserve, this system is unsustainable. It cannot last forever. And they both seem to believe that your best way out of this is crypto. In other news, it looks like Do Kwon was finally captured. This post says local media says Do Kwon was arrested alongside Terra's CFO, attempting to board a flight to Dubai using fake Costa Rican documents. This was in Montenegro. Also found with fake Belgian documents, 3 laptops, and 5 cell phones. Crypto Twitter was quick to point out that Do Kwon appears to be no criminal mastermind. This post says, Do Kwon comes off as completely incompetent. Costa Rican passports for a Korean man. Boarded the same flight as his co-conspirators. There's an Ethereum conference in Montenegro right now. You can just drive to Dubai. No need for airplanes. Has billions of dollars, but gets caught in under a year. Also, it looks like Hong Kong is allocating $50 million to expedite the development of a crypto hub. This is while the US is basically trying to chase crypto as completely as possible outside of its borders. Yes, we have Hong Kong throwing $50 million into crypto, and the US just trying to completely chase crypto outside the US. I love how Bitcoin Magazine here tries to make it all about Bitcoin when we all know Hong Kong is going to go crazy on all the non-Bitcoin crypto. Also, IOG dropped this video on the SIP 1694 workshop in Colorado. This was the Voltaire workshop, the governance workshop. I know some people were worried that this workshop was like somehow shrouded in secrecy, but I think if you watch this little video, it'll at least give you a glimpse into what went on there, and it doesn't seem all too secretive. Finally, it looks like Emurgo is making deals in Africa. I love to see this. They signed an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding, with Pan Atlantic University in Nigeria. This is fantastic news in my book because the demographics of sub-Saharan Africa as in Nigeria, will be a great engine for economic growth over the coming decades. This post says Emurgo Africa and Pan Atlantic University signed an MOU to co-develop a blockchain textbook and provide Web3 training programs to empower Pan Atlantic University students. Includes access to internships, mentorship, and joint research initiatives. This is some great planting of seeds for long-term plans for Cardano to be a part of this huge economic engine that is the demographics of sub-Saharan Africa. I hope you had a great week and you're getting ready for a fun weekend. Come by my live stream tomorrow, 4 p.m. Eastern with Cardano Ecosystem News. It'll be fun, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.